When I went into Pizza Hut before my 24-hour shift, I saw my fiancée with another guy. When I walked up, he said, "Leave my girlfriend alone, dude." She looked at me, then at him, and froze. My shift was starting in an hour, the kind of long haul that made time feel like static. A full 24 hours on duty at the fire station meant I wouldn't see a real bed until the next sunrise. Before heading in, I decided to grab something fast from Pizza Hut, comfort food before chaos. It was supposed to be a quick stop. Just a pepperoni personal pan, maybe a soda. Nothing more. The place wasn't busy, just the usual evening hum. Kids playing with straws, couples sharing slices, the smell of dough and cheese floating in the air. I stood in line, half scrolling through messages, when I noticed someone sitting near the window booth. The laugh hit me first. Light, familiar, something that used to belong to me. My eyes followed it like a reflex, and there she was. Jenna, my fiancée. She wasn't alone. Across from her sat a guy I didn't recognize. A little older than me, sharp haircut, designer watch flashing every time he moved his hand. Their pizza sat half-eaten between them. She leaned in close, fingers brushing his wrist like she'd done with me 1,000 times before. I froze. My body didn't catch up with what my eyes were seeing. Maybe they were co-workers. Maybe a client meeting. But then she laughed again, and this time, she touched his cheek. That killed the maybe. Something in me started to burn, slow and contained. I didn't make a scene. I didn't storm over yelling. I just started walking toward their table. She didn't even see me at first. But the guy did. His eyes flicked to mine, and I saw something ugly flash across his face. He smirked, like he'd won something I hadn't realized was a competition. When I reached the table, I stopped a foot away. Jenna finally looked up. The color drained out of her face. For a second, she looked like she'd seen a ghost. Before I could say a word, the guy leaned back in his chair, stretched an arm behind her, and said calmly, "Leave my girlfriend alone, dude." It didn't register at first. My mind tried to find another way to interpret the words. Girlfriend? Jenna? My fiancée? She froze. Her mouth opened, but nothing came out. She didn't correct him, didn't stand up, didn't even look at me directly, just stared at her plate, like maybe if she didn't move, this would all disappear. The silence got heavy. A family at the next table turned to look. The cashier hesitated behind the counter. I realized everyone was waiting for me to react. I didn't. I just said, "Got it," under my breath and walked out. Outside, the air was colder than I expected. I got in my car and sat there with the engine off. Through the glass, I could still see them. The guy was saying something fast, leaning in close, and Jenna kept shaking her head. At one point, she glanced at the window, and our eyes met. She flinched and looked away instantly. 10 minutes later, I saw them get up to leave. They exited through the back, maybe hoping to avoid me. He had his arm around her waist. She didn't pull away. I started the engine and drove off without looking back. But the image replayed in my head like a stuck video. The way she froze. The way he claimed her like it was already settled. And worst of all, the way she didn't deny it. That night at the station, I worked through alarms, calls, and smoke. The adrenaline drowned out everything else, but every pause between emergencies felt louder than the sirens. I tried not to think. Tried not to picture that table, that hand, that smirk. When dawn came, I sat on the edge of the bunk room cot staring at my phone. 7 missed calls from Jenna, all within the same hour after I'd left Pizza Hut. Then nothing. No texts, no explanations. Just silence. By afternoon, I finally drove home. Our apartment looked the same from the outside. Inside, it was half empty. Her shoes were gone, her side of the closet cleared out. There was an envelope on the kitchen counter, but when I opened it, it wasn't a letter. It was my spare key. No note. No closure. Just absence. I sat there at the kitchen table staring at that key until it didn't even look like metal anymore. It felt like the end of something that hadn't even been properly named. I called her. Straight to voicemail. Texted. No reply. Checked her social media. Our photos were gone. Every post, every caption that had my name in it vanished. She'd erased me overnight. That kind of precision wasn't impulsive. It was preparation. She hadn't slipped into someone else's arms by accident. She'd planned her exit. That thought stuck like a knife. So I started looking for patterns, something that might explain how long this had been happening. I wasn't playing detective. I just needed to know how deep the rot went. She'd told me she was working late 3 times in the past month. Each of those nights, she'd come home smelling like a different cologne. I'd noticed, but never questioned it. She'd said it was from hugging clients goodbye at events. I'd believed her. One weekend she'd said she was at her sister's place. That was the same weekend I saw her tagged in a restaurant photo downtown, but she'd untagged herself minutes later. Every little memory started aligning, the timeline rearranging itself like a cruel puzzle. I didn't even feel angry anymore. Just hollow. Like someone had stolen not only my trust, but my own sense of memory. That evening, I drove to her sister's place, hoping maybe she was there. Her sister, Leah, opened the door, looked startled, and whispered before I could ask, "You shouldn't be here. Janice, she's with someone now. It's not what you think." But it was exactly what I thought. I left without saying a word. On the way back, I passed a small apartment complex near downtown. And there it was, Jenna's car. Same license plate, same bumper sticker we'd picked together. Her car was parked next to a black SUV with the same red pizza box sitting on the dashboard. Blake's car. For a while, I just watched from across the street. She came out once, laughed at something he said, then leaned up to kiss him before disappearing back inside. I stayed there until the lights went out. That was the night I stopped being confused. Whatever was left of love or doubt turned into something colder. Not rage, not heartbreak, clarity. She hadn't made a mistake. She'd made a choice. When I drove off, I didn't take the highway back to the station. I went home and started clearing out the rest of her things. Photos, clothes, notes, everything. It wasn't revenge. It was reclamation. But as I was tossing her old perfume into a trash bag, my phone buzzed. A message from an unknown number. "You shouldn't have come to Pizza Hut last night." No name. No context. Just that line. And in that single text, I realized the story wasn't over. Someone wanted me to back off, and I had no idea why. For the first time since I'd seen her at that table, the heartbreak turned into something else entirely. Suspicion. Because the way Jenna had looked at me in that moment, terrified, not guilty, suddenly made sense. Something bigger than betrayal was going on. The message didn't sit right. The phrasing wasn't like Jenna's, and the number wasn't saved in my phone. I stared at it until the letters blurred. Whoever sent it knew what I saw, and they were confident enough to warn me off. I tried calling the number. No answer. Then I texted back, asking who it was. Delivered, but no reply. By morning, exhaustion had turned into resolve. I was done waiting for explanations that weren't coming. If Jenna wanted to vanish behind someone else's walls, then I'd walk right through them. After my shift, I drove straight to that downtown complex where I'd seen her car. It was Saturday, quiet streets, balconies full of people sipping coffee. Her silver hatchback was in the same spot, but now there was a dent on the side mirror. Blake's SUV was parked right beside it, angled like it belonged there permanently. I stood outside their building longer than I should have. My reflection in the glass door looked more tired than angry. I buzzed the apartment once, twice. No answer. Third time, the speaker crackled. A male voice came through, thick with annoyance. "Yeah. Is Jenna there?" I asked. A pause. Then a chuckle. "Guess again." The door opened, and Blake stood there, barefoot, holding a beer. His confidence was effortless, almost rehearsed. Behind him, I saw the corner of the couch, the glow of a TV, and a pair of women's shoes I recognized instantly. Jenna appeared from the hallway a second later. Her hair was wet from the shower, her face pale. When she saw me, she froze just like she had at Pizza Hut. I stepped forward, keeping my voice steady. "You moved out without saying a word." She didn't answer. Blake leaned against the doorframe, grinning. "She told me you guys broke up last week. Yes, she forgot to update your calendar." I looked at her. She flinched, but said nothing. The silence stretched, filled only by the sound of traffic from the street below. I was about to leave when something caught my eye inside the apartment, my navy blue fire department jacket hanging over a chair. The same one she used to wear when she missed me during night shifts. She noticed me looking at it. Her lips parted, maybe to apologize, but Blake cut her off. "Oh, that?" She said it was a joke. "I like how it fits." He walked over, picked it up, and put it on. The sleeves stretched tight around his arms. "Feels like it belongs here." That moment was the first real snap inside me. Not rage, just the sharp sound of something breaking quietly in the background. I didn't say another word. I turned around and left. But Blake's voice followed me down the hall, calling out something that made my chest twist. "Hey, man, if you're free, maybe come pick up your leftover stuff later. She doesn't need any reminders lying around." When I reached the parking lot, I sat behind the wheel, gripping the steering wheel until my hands hurt. The phone in my pocket buzzed again, another unknown message. "Walk away, before you lose more than her." The timing was too precise to be random. Later that night, after hours of turning it over in my mind, I realized Jenna hadn't changed her password on our shared savings app. I logged in. The account was still joint, though she probably forgot. Over the past week, I noticed multiple transfers labeled moving costs and rent deposit. Every transaction linked to an account under Blake's last name. Legally, it was still my money too. So I moved the remaining balance to my own account. Nothing illegal, nothing sneaky, just a clean withdrawal of what I'd earned. Then I shut down the shared access. If she wanted a new life, she could build it without the foundation I'd poured. But my small victory didn't feel satisfying. Something about that message still crawled under my skin. I couldn't let it go. So, the next evening, I drove back, not to confront her again, but to watch. At around 10, I parked across the street. The lights in Blake's apartment flickered on and off. Then, around 11, he left. He got into his SUV, phone pressed to his ear, pacing in front of the building. I caught parts of his conversation through the open window. Words like documents, access, and her password still works. It wasn't the language of romance. It sounded like business. A few minutes later, Jenna stepped out onto the balcony, wrapped in a blanket, looking down the street like she was waiting for someone. She stayed there for a while, then went inside again, pulling the curtains shut. I should have left, but curiosity pinned me. Maybe it was pride too. An hour later, I got a call from a number I didn't recognize. Jenna's sister, Leah. She sounded out of breath. Noah, listen, whatever's happening, Jenna's not safe. She told me Blake's been asking questions about your work schedule, about the fire department, about those warehouse inspections you handle. She's scared. I think she's mixed up in something. That was when everything tilted. Blake wasn't just another man stealing someone's fiancée. He wanted something else, something connected to my job. I drove back to my apartment, locked the door, and sat in the dark, piecing it together. Jenna knew certain details about my routes, my access codes to municipal facilities, even contractor schedules. If Blake had been pressing her for that, it meant he was after more than love. The next morning, I stopped by the station early. One of the dispatch coordinators, Don, mentioned something odd. An anonymous request had come in last week asking for copies of the department's access maps for commercial properties. It had been flagged and ignored. Looked like someone trying to get insider info, Don said. You wouldn't happen to know a guy named Blake Everett, would you? He used your ID number in the request. The air left my chest. My ID number wasn't public. That evening, I went back again, this time to confront both of them. No more waiting. No more messages. When I got there, Blake's SUV was gone. Jenna answered the door, red-eyed, makeup streaked. The apartment behind her looked trashed. Bottles, overturned chair, cracked phone screen on the floor. She didn't even try to hide the panic. He left, she whispered. Said he needed to handle something tonight. Took my laptop. Handle what? I asked. Her voice shook. He said if I told anyone, he'd tell the police I helped him. Helped him with what? She pressed her palms against her face. Those forms you filled at work. He made me copy one. I didn't know what he wanted it for. I swear I didn't. It hit me then. This wasn't just infidelity anymore. It was criminal. As she spoke, my phone buzzed again. Another message, same number. You should have stayed quiet. I showed it to her. She looked terrified. That's him. He keeps changing numbers. Before I could ask more, headlights flashed through the window. Blake's SUV pulled into the lot fast, braking hard. He stepped out, saw me through the glass, and froze. Then, without a word, he turned and drove off again, tires screeching. Jenna started crying, saying she didn't know what to do. I told her to pack a bag and leave town for a few days, go to her sister's. She nodded, shaking. As I left, I noticed something strange on the doorframe. A small black camera wedged under the peephole. A live one, blinking faint red. I took a photo of it before leaving. By the time I got home, I knew this wasn't about jealousy anymore. Blake had been watching, planning, and now that Jenna had cracked, I was next. And when the city's fire systems suddenly glitched the next morning, shutting down half the internal servers, I knew exactly whose name they'd see in the log files, mine. Someone had used my credentials. The next morning started with chaos. My phone rang before sunrise, dispatch asking if I'd accessed the city's internal network overnight. I hadn't even touched my work laptop since the previous evening. They said my ID was used to request restricted maintenance files, warehouse schematics, alarm circuits, and door access codes for 3 commercial buildings. The same kind Blake had been prying about. By the time I got to the station, everything was tense. The chief didn't accuse me outright, but the questions made it clear he suspected something. I explained I hadn't logged in, even offered to show my location data. He promised to look into it, but I knew that tone. When someone says that in uniform, it usually means you're already halfway guilty. When I left the meeting room, my stomach was a knot. I sat in my truck staring at my reflection in the window. How do you explain that your fiancé's new boyfriend might have stolen your credentials to access city infrastructure? It sounded paranoid, even to me. At noon, I got another text. Same anonymous number. Told you not to dig. Now it's your mess. I showed it to a colleague, Don, who looked uneasy. If this guy's using your ID, he's got access to some serious systems. You need to lock everything down now. I did, reset every password, reported the breach, filed an incident report. But my name was already on the logs. I could feel the suspicion in everyone's eyes. The timing was too perfect, too targeted. Someone wanted me blamed. And I knew exactly who. By afternoon, I couldn't take it anymore. I drove straight to Blake's building again. His SUV was there. Jenna's car wasn't. I climbed the stairs and knocked on the door. No answer. I knocked harder. The third time, the door cracked open. Blake stood there in a gray hoodie, a beer in his hand, eyes unfocused. "Can we talk?" I said. He grinned. "You like walking into walls, don't you? I told you to let it go." I stepped forward, blocking the door from closing. "You used my credentials." He tilted his head, pretending confusion. "What credentials?" "You know what I mean. The city network, the maintenance access, all of it." He laughed under his breath. "Man, you're really losing it. Maybe you shouldn't mix caffeine with paranoia." Behind him, I saw something on the kitchen counter. My department-issued flash drive. The one that had been missing from my desk for a week. That was all the confirmation I needed. I didn't lunge or shout. I just looked at him long enough for him to realize I knew. Then I turned around and left before I did something I couldn't take back. When I reached the parking lot, my hands were shaking. My phone buzzed again. This time it was Leah, Jenna's sister. She sounded frantic. "Noah, something happened. Jenna's at my place, crying her eyes out. She said Blake was threatening to expose her if she didn't keep helping him." "What did she even do?" "I told her to keep Jenna there and not let her leave." Then I drove straight to Jenna's office. If Blake had used her as a backdoor into the system, there'd be traces. Her company was mid-sized, contracting with logistics and infrastructure firms. I walked in pretending I was there to drop off something for her. At the reception desk, a young woman mentioned Jenna had been called into HR this morning. That was my next stop. I parked across the street and waited. Half an hour later, I saw her come out of the building, pale and shaking. She looked around, spotted me, and froze. Then she walked straight to my truck, climbed in without asking, and just sat there staring at her hands. "He's destroying me," she whispered. "They think I gave him access voluntarily. They found messages on my computer." "What messages?" She looked at me, terrified. "Ones he wrote, pretending to be me." Her hands were trembling. "He said if I told anyone, he'd leak photos. Ones I didn't even know he took. I think he installed a camera here." She handed me a small flash drive, different from mine. "He said to keep this in case something happened. I think it's his insurance." I plugged it into my phone using an adapter. Inside were screenshots of emails, invoices, encrypted data logs, all tagged with Blake's name and her company's network. It wasn't just my credentials he'd stolen. He'd been funneling classified logistics data to another contracting firm. "He's using both of us," I said quietly. Before she could reply, someone honked behind us. Blake's SUV pulled up across the street. He stepped out, sunglasses on, phone to his ear. When he saw us together in my truck, his expression went dark. He started walking toward us. I told Jenna to lock her door. He stopped right beside the driver's window and leaned down. His voice was calm, but his eyes were manic. "You two still playing victim?" People nearby started noticing. The street wasn't empty anymore. Office workers, pedestrians. I told him to back off. He smirked, then pulled out his phone and started filming. "This is the guy who broke into my apartment," he said loud enough for others to hear. "Stole my stuff, threatened my girlfriend." "She's not your girlfriend," I said. "Tell them that, Jenna." She froze again, paralyzed by fear. The man knew how to weaponize her silence. Then something in me snapped. I stepped out of the truck and told him to stop lying. He laughed and pushed past me, pretending to check the truck bed. That was when I grabbed his wrist, instinctively, not violently, just to stop him. But he shouted like I'd hit him. "He's attacking me. Someone call the cops." It happened fast. A security guard from the building came running. Two people pulled out their phones. Within minutes, a patrol car pulled up. The officer separated us. Blake started spinning his story immediately, that I'd been stalking Jenna, that I'd hacked his accounts, that I'd been sending threats. The camera on his phone was still recording, the lens aimed deliberately at the officer. I thought I was done for. But then Jenna got out of the truck, shaking but determined. For once, she didn't freeze. She told the officer everything. How Blake had manipulated her, used her credentials, recorded her, and framed both of us. The officer asked to see the flash drive. I handed it over. He glanced at a few files, then called for backup. Within 15 minutes, 2 more officers showed up. They searched Blake's SUV and found 3 external drives, all labeled with corporate names. That was the moment the show ended. The smirk dropped off his face like paint in the rain. They handcuffed him right there, while half the office staff watched from the windows. Jenna collapsed against the truck, crying. The officers thanked her for coming forward. They told me they'd review my department's records too, but it looked like I'd been framed. By the time the dust settled, the parking lot was empty again. Blake was gone, taken in for questioning. Jenna sat on the curb, hugging her knees. She looked small, like the version of her I'd fallen in love with years ago, before everything turned cold. But something inside me had changed. I didn't comfort her. I didn't offer my jacket or tell her it'd be okay. I just said, "You let him use my name. My life. You could have stopped him before it got this far." She nodded weakly. I thought he'd leave me alone if I just did what he wanted. The officers returned the flash drive later that night and told me Blake would be held on multiple charges: data theft, harassment, attempted fraud. But one of them added something that stuck. He says he's got evidence you were in on it. Said he left a file with your name on it. I didn't sleep that night. At 3 a.m., my phone buzzed one last time. The message came from Blake's number. Round 2 starts tomorrow. Check your car. When I went outside, the windshield was smashed, and across the hood, written in permanent marker, were 4 words that made my stomach turn. Still your fault, hero. Morning light exposed what the streetlights had hidden. My windshield was splintered into a spiderweb of cracks, the hood streaked with marker like a message carved into skin. The neighbors stood watching as I took photos for the insurance claim, pretending not to stare. They'd heard the shouting the night before, the sirens, the cops. I was officially the building's new rumor. I called the officer who'd handled Blake's arrest. He said Blake had been released on bail, pending further investigation. My stomach dropped. I knew what that meant. Blake had enough money or friends to buy himself time. And time was the one thing he'd use against me. That afternoon, I went to the station again. The chief called me into his office. He looked tired, older somehow. Noah, they're still reviewing your access logs, he said carefully. Everything points to your ID being used remotely, but it's your responsibility. Until this clears, you're suspended. With pay, but off duty. It wasn't punishment, it was protocol. But it felt like exile. The department was my world. Without it, I was just noise in a system that had already started turning against me. I walked out without arguing. The locker where my gear had hung felt like a grave marker now. Empty, clean, final. Outside, I sat in the truck for a long time, engine off. I should have been angry, but all I felt was exhaustion. Jenna's lies, Blake's manipulation, the collapse of everything I'd built. It had blended into one slow ache. Then my phone rang again. Leah. Her voice was trembling. He came here, she said. Blake. He found out Jenna's staying with me. He stood outside the house, screaming her name for half an hour. The police came, but he was gone before they arrived. I told her to pack and take Jenna somewhere safe. Tell her not to answer his calls, I said. Leah hesitated. She's scared, Noah. Really scared. But she keeps saying you shouldn't be alone either. He's blaming you for everything. The irony hit like acid. I'd been the one who stayed quiet, who walked away from that Pizza Hut table instead of losing control. And now I was the villain in Blake's version of the story. That night, I couldn't sleep. I kept the phone on my chest, waiting for another text. Around midnight, it came. Not a message this time, but an email. Anonymous sender. Subject line, proof. The attachment was a photo, me, standing in front of Blake's apartment, hand on his doorframe. The timestamp read 1:48 a.m., even though I'd left hours earlier. Below it, a second photo, my smashed windshield. The caption said, he finally snapped. He was building a narrative. Piece by piece, he was painting me as the unstable ex, the jealous firefighter with a temper. I forwarded the email to the officer I'd been in touch with, then shut off my phone. If Blake wanted chaos, I'd give him something he couldn't twist, a truth too public to spin. The next day, I visited the police station in person. I brought everything, screenshots of the messages, copies of the flash drive, even the photo of the hidden camera I'd found near Jenna's door. The detective on duty listened carefully. You're not the first person he's done this to, he said. He's under investigation for multiple identity fraud cases. We've been trying to connect the dots. Finally, something shifted. They asked me to stay available for questioning. For the first time, I felt like maybe the system wasn't against me. It was catching up to him. But Blake didn't disappear quietly. 2 nights later, someone banged on my door at 2 a.m. I grabbed the baseball bat by the entryway and opened it just enough to see flashing blue lights. The officers looked uneasy. Sir, we received a domestic disturbance call from this address. Are you alone? Yes, I said. They stepped inside anyway, checking the rooms. When they found nothing, they apologized. But before leaving, one of them added, the caller gave your name. Said a man was being held here against his will. I didn't need to ask who made the call. Blake was still trying to play puppeteer, wasting police time, keeping me on edge. The next morning, I went back to the precinct, ready to file a restraining order. But before I could sign the paperwork, the officer came running from the back office, waving a sheet. You won't believe this, he said. He turned himself in. Apparently, Blake had gone to another precinct claiming he was the victim, saying I'd stalked and attacked him. But his timing betrayed him. The evidence they'd gathered from his SUV, the external drives, and Jenna's flash drive all tied him to the corporate breach. His confession only dug the hole deeper. They took him into custody again, this time without bail. When the news hit, Jenna's company fired her officially, violation of data protection policy. Even though she was technically a victim, her name was on the access logs. HR didn't care about nuance. She lost everything. A week later, I got a letter from the department. Suspension lifted. They cleared my record after the investigation confirmed my credentials were cloned. The chief called personally to apologize. "You're good at your job, Noah. Don't let this break you," he said. But part of me already was broken. One afternoon, while off duty, I stopped by a cafe downtown. The kind of neutral space where the world keeps moving no matter what personal storm you're in. That's when I saw her. Jenna was behind the counter, wearing an apron, hair tied back. She looked smaller, quieter, older somehow. When she noticed me, her hands froze mid-motion. She came over slowly, unsure if she should smile. "I heard he's in jail," I said softly. She nodded. 18 months. Fraud, coercion, theft. We stood there in the hum of espresso machines and conversation. She swallowed hard. "I never meant to hurt you, Noah. I thought he was different. He promised things I wanted to believe in. By the time I realized what he was doing, it was too late." I listened, but my sympathy was a dry well. "You didn't just lose him," I said quietly. "You lost me the day you pretended not to know who I was." Her eyes filled with tears, but I didn't stay to watch them fall. I left a tip in the jar and walked out. Outside, the air was cooler, lighter. For the first time in months, I felt distance, not the ache of betrayal, but the calm that comes after surviving it. A week later, the city released a press statement about Blake's case. His firm had been running a side operation selling insider data from city contractors. He dragged at least 4 employees into his scheme, 2 of whom were facing minor charges. Jenna wasn't one of them. She'd cooperated fully and testified against him. When I read that, I felt no satisfaction, just finality. Months passed. Work returned to normal. People stopped whispering. Life settled back into its rhythm. Calls, sirens, the heat of engines and smoke. But I changed small things. I switched gyms, found a new apartment, stopped eating at Pizza Hut altogether. Sometimes during late shifts, I'd think about that night. The table for 2. The moment when her laugh had turned into the sound of my unraveling. But now, when I remembered it, there was no bitterness. Just distance. One morning, while heading to a new station assignment, I stopped at a small diner for breakfast. The waitress handed me coffee, smiling in that polite, detached way service workers do when they've seen too much of people. Then I noticed the name tag, Jenna. Not her, just someone else with the same name. But for a second, I almost laughed. The universe really knew how to twist irony. I left a big tip, finished my coffee, and went to work. Later that day, the department got a news notification: Blake Everett's sentencing finalized. 18 months confirmed, plus probation. A photo of him in handcuffs flashed across the screen. His face looked smaller now, powerless. That night, after the last emergency call, I drove home through quiet streets and past the old Pizza Hut. It was still there, neon sign flickering. Inside, another couple sat laughing in the same booth where my world had fallen apart. I didn't stop. I just kept driving, windows down, letting the city's noise swallow the last echoes of her name. I'd learned something in the wreckage, that betrayal doesn't destroy you if you don't let it define you. Sometimes, it just teaches you how to keep walking past the fire without needing to look back. And as I pulled into the station for another long night, I realized that was all I ever needed. Peace, not revenge.